For years, El Salvador lived in the shadow of a fear that touched every street and every home. Nightfall wasn't just the end of the day, it was a warning. Families locked their doors early. Streets emptied long before midnight. And the quiet that followed wasn't peace, it was survival. For decades, fear grew in ways a government could measure, and in ways it couldn't. Parents warned their children which corners to avoid. Teachers dismissed classes early because walking home after sunset became too dangerous. The crisis wasn't just about crime, it was about identity. The identity of a nation caught between resilience and exhaustion. As murders rose and extortion became commonplace, people stopped asking for reforms. They began asking for survival. By the time the government announced its new vision, the country had reached a point of collective fatigue, a moment when even controversial solutions felt acceptable simply because no other solutions remained. The fortress was not built from concrete first. It was built from desperation. Then came a leader who didn't simply promise change. He moved with a determination that instantly divided opinions. Nayib Bukele took office during one of the most violent periods in the country's modern history. He recognized something many leaders ignored, that fear, once normalized, becomes a weapon, and that hope, once promised, becomes a contract. He spoke the language of a generation raised in uncertainty, and he offered a plan that felt like a reset button, not a reform, but a rupture. His approval ratings skyrocketed. His critics warned that popularity can conceal consequences. But the public sentiment was unmistakable. They didn't want someone to manage the crisis, they wanted someone to end it. This shift in expectation set the stage for actions that once seemed unimaginable. Before any foundation was laid, the idea of CECOT began as a whisper inside closed government rooms. A vision of a prison unlike any other in the region, vast, controlled, and technologically reinforced. For supporters, it was the long-awaited solution. For critics, it was a sign of a government stepping into dangerous territory. Long before the public knew, a series of private meetings began shaping the blueprint. Behind closed doors, technical teams, architects, and security specialists worked through nights filled with documents and models. The questions were enormous. How do you build a prison meant to hold the most dangerous individuals in the region? How do you design it so escape isn't just difficult, but impossible? And what message should its structure send to the outside world? CECOT became more than a building. It became a philosophy, a belief that order could be engineered, assembled, and enforced through architecture. The final blueprint of CECOT was unlike any other prison design in the hemisphere. It wasn't created to rehabilitate. It wasn't modeled to reintegrate. It was designed for containment, efficient, total, and uninterrupted. Its layout served three purposes: to separate, to observe, and to break the networks that once operated freely. Multiple rings of security surrounded the heart of the structure. Every hallway flowed into checkpoints. Every checkpoint flowed into barriers. Every barrier flowed into systems built to restrict movement not just physically, but psychologically. Architects debated details most people will never see. How wide should the corridors be? How many cameras can be installed before they become redundant? How do you design a space so that even silence feels controlled? CECOT was not just engineered to function. It was engineered to dominate. Construction on CECOT moved at a pace that astonished even those overseeing it. In a region where major projects often drag for years, this one raced forward with uncommon momentum. The speed became a statement in itself, that the government wasn't just promising security, it was building it, visibly, aggressively, relentlessly. With every passing month, the structure expanded, walls rose, watchtowers multiplied. Floodlights were mounted in patterns designed to eliminate shadows entirely. The country watched this transformation unfold through satellite images and official announcements. With every update, the project became more than just a construction site. It became a countdown to a new era, one the world struggled to interpret. The day the first buses were brought to CECOT marked a shift in the nation's identity. The prison, once an ambitious plan on paper, now became a functioning reality. Individuals who once dominated entire neighborhoods with fear found themselves entering a system designed for total control. Images of the transfer spread across the world. Some viewers saw justice, others saw a warning. But within El Salvador, the message landed clearly. The era of negotiation with violence had ended, replaced by an era of overwhelming force. The transfer marked the beginning of a narrative that positioned CECOT not just as a prison, but as the central pillar of national strategy. For the first time in years, A large portion of the population believed the government had taken back control. The nation exhaled, not fully, not confidently, but with a cautious hope. And that hope became a powerful political tool. As crime numbers declined, life in El Salvador began to change. Streets that once emptied before dark stayed busy longer. Businesses reopened in neighborhoods abandoned for years. Families walked with a confidence many thought they would never feel again. But with every victory came questions. What was the human cost of such sweeping power? Could a nation secure safety without compromising its principles? And what happens when a fortress becomes the symbol of that safety? The very structure that enabled these changes raised moral and ethical dilemmas that could no longer be ignored. CECOT stood as a testament to what a government can build when it moves without hesitation. But its presence raised a question far bigger than its walls. Was the fortress built to protect the nation? Or had the nation begun to revolve around the fortress? The tension between safety and liberty lingered, unspoken but undeniable. Inside government offices and international organizations, debates intensified. Supporters pointed to undeniable results. Critics pointed to rights, freedoms, and the possibility of excess. And the truth lived somewhere between those extremes, complex, uncomfortable, and deeply important. As El Salvador moved into a new chapter, the world watched, not just to see what CECOT would become, but to understand what it meant. Behind closed doors, private discussions began to surface. Questions about oversight, concerns about long-term power, data points that didn't fit neatly into public speeches, small details, quiet observations, uneasy expressions, hints that the story wasn't as complete as it seemed. And then, the most unsettling question emerged. If CECOT was built to confront the nation's darkest fears, what happens if the structure itself becomes a new kind of fear? The fortress stands, immovable and immense, but the truth behind its long-term consequences has only just begun to unfold. A final question lingers. In the pursuit of absolute safety, how much power can a nation give away before it becomes something else entirely? Something strange started happening in El Salvador after the CECOT mega prison opened. Fear, that loud, constant presence that controlled everything, began to fade. It didn't disappear, not completely, but it got quieter. People started noticing it in small ways, little moments. Kids began playing outside later in the evening. Buses and public transport kept running deeper into the night. Neighborhoods that everyone had written off as lost causes slowly started to feel like part of the city again. For the first time in decades, fear wasn't setting the pace of daily life for the entire country. But that fear didn't just vanish. It moved. It relocated itself behind thick walls. It lived behind surveillance cameras and strict protocols. And as fear changed its address, the nation's relationship with authority started to change right along with it. CECOT became one of the most photographed prisons in the world before most of its cells were even occupied. The images were powerful, carefully crafted, and impossible to forget. You saw them everywhere, endless rows of detainees, stark concrete stretching as far as the eye could see. It was a kind of overwhelming, brutalist symmetry, designed to overload your senses. These pictures weren't just documenting a new prison, they were building a new national story. For those who supported the government's crackdown, the images were a symbol of strength and accountability. Justice, finally being served. For critics, they were a sign of intimidation and government overreach. And for the rest of the world watching online, it was a mix of fascination and deep unease. But no matter what you thought, one thing was undeniable. CECOT was controlling the narrative. In today's digital age, power isn't just about weapons or laws anymore. It's about visibility. And that fortress was always visible. As this new system grew, more and more questions about its legality started to bubble up. The government was using emergency powers to make rapid arrests and transfer thousands of people into the new prison system. For a lot of citizens who had lived in terror for years, this speed was a welcome change. Finally, something was being done. But for legal experts and human rights advocates, it set off alarm bells. The traditional, sometimes slow, rhythm of justice, investigation, followed by a trial, then sentencing, had been compressed. It was replaced by something much faster, much more immediate. The argument from supporters was simple. Extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. You have to fight fire with fire. Critics, however, pointed out a dangerous precedent. Once you replace due process with speed, it's very rare for the system to ever slow back down again. And CECOT sits right at the heart of this entire debate. It's a massive, physical structure that holds a very abstract, very important question. Can justice still be called justice when efficiency becomes its most important goal? Think about it. What happens to a society when the fear of crime is replaced by the fear of the state? It's a complex trade-off, and one that doesn't have an easy answer. The story of CECOT is more than just about a prison. It's about a country trying to redefine its future, grappling with the ghosts of its past. It's about the fundamental balance between security and freedom. And as the walls of CECOT continue to stand, they cast a long shadow over El Salvador, forcing everyone to confront what they're willing to sacrifice for a sense of peace. What most people never saw was the invisible machinery that kept CECOT functioning. Behind every wall, behind every cell door, stood layers of complex logistics. We are talking about sophisticated data systems tracking every movement, algorithms that prioritize surveillance feeds, and entire teams dedicated to analyzing behavior patterns in real time. This wasn't a prison frozen in time or tradition. It was adaptive, it was modern, and it was relentlessly monitored. In many ways, CECOT represented a new frontier, perhaps even the future of incarceration itself, a future not defined by guards with keys, but by intelligent systems that never sleep. And as these systems matured, so did their reach. What started as a single, isolated prison quickly became a crucial node in a much wider national security network. This network fundamentally reshaped how the state understood and exercised control. It wasn't just about locking people up anymore. It was about processing information on a massive scale. Public discussion often boiled CECOT down to simple statistics, occupancy rates, crime reduction percentages, and detailed cost analysis. These numbers are important, but they don't tell the whole story. Behind those cold figures were individuals, real people whose lives had intersected with violence, poverty, and power long before this fortress was even built. Some were confirmed leaders of vast criminal networks, the masterminds behind years of chaos. Others were just foot soldiers, caught up in a cycle they saw no way out of. And some, they insisted, were simply caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, swept up in mass arrests designed to send a powerful message to the public. But CECOT didn't ask about personal stories. It didn't pause for nuance or context. Inside its imposing walls, individual identity collapsed into uniformity. Names were turned into records. Complex life histories were compressed into digital files. And this process of erasure, this systematic stripping away of individuality, raised a quiet but deeply unsettling question. Can a system that completely ignores individual context still claim to have any moral authority? Can justice exist when the person is forgotten? As the initial results from this strategy began to emerge, the world split into two distinct camps. On one side, some governments and leaders praised El Salvador. They saw a nation doing what others were too afraid to do, taking decisive action against an overwhelming threat. On the other side, critics and human rights organizations warned that this approach risked normalizing extreme measures, setting a dangerous precedent for others to follow. The debate raged on. Human rights groups released detailed reports documenting alleged abuses. Security analysts published papers debating the long-term outcomes and effectiveness. Media outlets all over the world framed the story through their own political lenses, creating a whirlwind of conflicting narratives. Yet, there was one thing nobody could deny. CECOT forced a global reckoning. It directly challenged a long-standing, deeply entrenched assumption in criminology, the idea that crime could only be reduced slowly, incrementally, and with extreme caution. El Salvador had thrown that playbook out the window. They chose speed, they chose massive scale, and they chose overwhelming force. And the results, whether you see them as a success or a catastrophe, have complicated every existing theory on how to fight organized crime. It's a story that is far from over, and one that will be studied for decades to come. Over time, Nayib Bukele's image and the CECOT mega prison became one and the same. The prison wasn't just a policy anymore, it was a powerful symbol. For his supporters, Bukele was a leader who actually delivered on his promises, a man of action. But for his critics, he was a man gathering an almost unheard of amount of authority. And history, as it often does, whispered its usual warning. When our institutions become just extensions of one person, their legacies become incredibly fragile. CECOT absolutely supercharged Bukele's power, but it also chained his political future to its success or failure. If the prison succeeds in the long run, he'll go down in history as a visionary disruptor who saved his country. But if it fails, he'll be remembered as a cautionary tale. This massive uncertainty loomed silently behind every single impressive statistic, every reported drop in crime. Perhaps the most unsettling change was just how quickly people got used to the calm. The peace that once felt like a miracle soon started to feel normal. And when something feels normal, it quickly becomes an expectation. A whole generation of children is now growing up who will never know the constant fear their parents lived with. They will inherit a country shaped not by daily chaos, but by rigid control. This raises a really deep question. What kind of citizens are created by a system of absolute order? History has shown us time and again that peace bought with fear often comes with a hidden price tag, one that you don't see right away, but that reveals itself slowly, over years. CECOT stabilized El Salvador's present, there's no doubt about that. But the future? That's still a blank page. The longer CECOT stands, the less it feels like a temporary fix. This is how entire systems transform, not with some grand announcement, but through quiet, steady repetition. What began as a reaction to unbearable violence has now evolved into a model, a blueprint that future leaders could easily expand, replicate, or even abuse for their own purposes. And once a system like this is firmly in place, taking it apart becomes immensely harder than building it in the first place. Every powerful structure, whether it's a government or an idea, eventually faces the same ultimate test. The question isn't just, does it work? The real question is, how does it change the people who come to depend on it? CECOT has undeniably reshaped El Salvador's present, but history will be the final judge of its true influence, its impact on the nation's core values, its democratic institutions, and the limits of its power. Because the true danger of a fortress like this isn't just about who it keeps locked inside. It's about what it teaches the rest of the world to accept as normal. CECOT had no defined endpoint. No sunset clause. Its very success made a retreat plan seem unnecessary, and therefore unlikely. But history shows us that power without a retreat plan doesn't just fade away. It transforms, it expands, and it seeks new justifications for its existence. And this raised a silent but critical concern. If the fortress no longer needs crime to justify its existence, what will it need instead? As daily life stabilized in El Salvador, the moral urgency that fueled the initial crackdown began to soften. People stopped debating the methods and focused on the outcome. Safety replaced scrutiny. Comfort replaced concern. This moral quiet wasn't indifference, it was relief. But relief can be deceptive. It can lull societies into accepting conditions they once rejected. And by the time the discomfort returns, the systems in place might already be too entrenched to challenge. CECOT thrived in this quiet. President Bukele's leadership became inseparable from CECOT's legacy. His success depended on its continuation, and its reputation depended on his authority. This fusion created a powerful narrative, but also a fragile one. What happens when leadership changes? What happens when the architect is gone, but the structure remains standing? Institutions almost always outlive individuals. And when they do, their original purpose can shift. CECOT's future won't be determined by its creator, but by those who inherit it. Every era, every nation, asks the same questions in different ways. How much control is too much? How much safety is enough? And when does protection cross the line into domination? CECOT forced El Salvador to answer these questions quickly, perhaps too quickly for deep reflection. And now, as a sense of calm settles deeper into national life, the questions are returning. They're quieter, more subtle, but no less important. CECOT stands unchanged. Its walls don't age like political promises. Its cameras don't blink with shifts in public opinion. Its corridors remain patient. The prison doesn't argue for its purpose. It simply exists. And that very existence is its greatest power. Nations are remembered not only for what they defeat, but for what they build in the process. El Salvador defeated fear, or at least, pushed it behind walls. But history will ultimately decide whether the cost of that victory was balance, restraint, or something far harder to recover. CECOT may one day be remembered as a turning point, or as a warning, or perhaps as both. And as we watch this chapter unfold, the final question lingers, unanswered. When safety is achieved through absolute control, does freedom quietly change its meaning? Thanks for watching. If this story made you think, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the complex issues shaping our world.